Hi, hello and welcome everyone. We are recording now. Thank you all for being with us here today. A copy of the recording is going to be housed with the Kindertransport Association in America, so thank you so much to Melissa Hacker for this. I'm Amy. I think everybody's been sending me emails. I'm based here in the UK. I've just finished my PhD on how the Kindertransport is remembered and represented in English speaking host nations such as Britain, America, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. I'm going to be interviewing Hannah today. Before I introduce you to Hannah, I'm just going to introduce you to our other two speakers. So I'd like to introduce you to a.lawrence, if you can give us a wave. Andy is a history teacher at a secondary school in London. He has an interest in Holocaust and genocide education and recently undertook a research project on local links to the Kindertransport, which he's going to share with you today. Our other speaker is Professor Bill Niven. Give us a wave. Bill is a Professor for Contemporary German History at Nottingham Trent University. He's written widely on Germany's attempts to come to terms with its Nazi and GDR past, and more recently on European memory of the Holocaust. Bill has also been researching memory of the Kindertransport, particularly in Germany. It's been really lovely to publish a few articles together on this. Bill's also published many books. I'm just going to mention a few here. One is Facing the Nazi Past, The Booking World Child, Representations of Flight and Expulsion, Hitler in Film, The Führer's Secret Passion. So last but by no means least, a real special welcome to Hanna Miley. Many of you know Hannah as a dear friend. We're privileged today to listen to Hannah talk about her experiences of the Kindertransport. So Hannah lives in Arizona, and over the last few years, she has made extensive journeys to Germany. She was born in Bonn, Germany on the 18th of February 1932. On the 24th of July 1939, Hannah's parents placed her on a train bound for Britain. Hannah's parents were extremely brave to send their beloved daughter to a foreign country. Hannah wrote to me recently about her parents' leap of faith, and this is something we'll shortly discuss today. So Hannah, thank you so much for being with us. I'm just going to unmute you. Did that work?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. And thank you for the vision for this. I really, really thankful.
Oh, thank you. Before I ask you the first question, I'm just going to hold up a copy of your books as well. So I don't know if everybody can see. This is the English version of Hannah's book, and this is the German copy. We'll tweet the links in, oh, there we go, Bill's holding up as well. We will tweet the links Hannah sent me to the books on the chat shortly. So yeah, thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here. I suppose we'll start with your book, really. Why did you decide to write your book?
Well, I was a very reluctant author, and there was a multitude of reasons for that. I was very hesitant to dig deeply into my past. I was afraid, actually, to face the grief and the pain of it. Would I be able to have the courage to bear my inner life and put it out there for the whole world to see, you know? And then I was also a bit concerned about false memories. You know, I think memories are very tricky things, and I really wanted to tell the truth. Another reason I held back for a lot of years was that I had very high standard for what a book should be, and I realized that I didn't have it to do, you know, it was beyond my capacity. And I think what pushed me over the precipice was a German friend. And I think it's quite significant that she was German, a very dear friend. Some of people on this call will know her, Gerda Schaller. And the question she asked me took place in Gmünd in the Eifel, Germany, the place where I lived my first 7 years. So it's very significant, the location of the question and the person who asked me. And she didn't have a big discussion. She just said, why don't you write a story? And I began to write. That was, I felt, you say, why did I write it? It was like a compulsion to do it at that point, having waited all those years, you know.
Absolutely. And you've just recently been able to do your audiobook. I wondered if you could tell us about that.
Well, it's also very significant to me that Susan Tackenberg, who is the narrator of the audiobook, is here on this call. You know, I think it's quite wonderful. I realized that many people today are not into reading an actual physical book. You know, there's a difference. There's some people who will only read paper and they're really strong on that. But a significant amount of people are traveling and everything, younger, they listen to audiobooks. So I had this deep desire that we should have an audio version of the book. And so we searched for a narrator. And we must have listened to about 100 people with examples. You know, you can go to Amazon and other sites and listen to narrators. And the person that stood out was Susan. And you know, to me, it's very interesting that because of her own background, she has links. I hope it's okay for me to say, Susan, your father was a Jewish refugee in his teens from Vienna. And to me, that made not only her skill in narration, she really got into the story, and she was enormously empathetic in her reading. It was pleasing to listen to, but what I was looking for was somebody that could express the heart of what it was about. And so after many ups and downs, it's now available.
Absolutely. And do you want to tell people about how the project was funded?
Yes. You mean the audiobook?
Yeah.
Yes, that's so interesting. You know, how many years is it since us refugees left Germany? And just in the last couple of years, the German government has agreed to pay some recompensation to Kindertransport children. And the cost of doing the audio, I would say a third of it came from the restitution or the recompense of the German government given to Kindertransport children. And I thought that was enormously appropriate. It was like taking that money from the German government, and by giving the money, there was an acknowledgement of what was done. It was a public confession, and investing it in the audiobook. Because, you know, I really would like the people who listen to the audiobook not just to hear about this poor child, this victim, this, you know, one of 1,000 children who were delivered, I want them to hear something more hopeful, a message of, I'm very impressed with what the German government is doing in regard to the past. And it's enormously healing to my soul.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations we've had about this is really, really interesting, and all these connections that you are making. Just to go back to your book again, it's really interesting how you write, and you're an absolutely amazing writer, I think. You don't really tell your story in a chronological order. It moves, it jumps, it zigzags. Like one memory leads into another. I just wondered if you could share with us why you decided to write in that way.
I would say that I look at the book almost like a journal. It's I go from one memory to another, and it unfolds a record of my healing journey. And while I was writing the book, I was discovering new things. So in a way, I'm recording my traveling to the past, and also experiencing sharing the excitement of new things that come to light. When I started to write the book, I wasn't able to access so many records on the internet. And so it involved a lot of ordering books and seeing footnotes and ordering those books. But the biggest deal for me was going back to the actual places where things happened, because I learned new things, and that was going on when I was writing the book. But I would have to say, this is a kind of funny story, when Gerda suggested to me that it might be good to write my story, and I kind of agreed, she put me in touch with a German publisher, and we paid a visit to the chief editor. And I remember one of the first things he said was, "Now, don't just write a calendar, this happened then, and then the next thing and the next thing. That's boring." So that was kind of going through my head. I felt a real freedom to escape from the bondage of the calendar. And I actually just freely associated what I was learning of myself. And, many memories started to come back as I wrote. I was 7 when there was this big gap in my life, the German part and the English part. And at 7, you don't have really so much cognizant memory. It's and so it was limited. And it was as though the writing brought up memories. And that is all explaining the zigzag pattern.
Absolutely. It's really interesting how you move through time in the book, and we've had conversations about a personal transnational memory of moving, of these journeys that you've taken, past and present. Talking about Germany, I wondered if you could share with us about your memories of growing up in Germany.
Yes. I think maybe I should share a couple of memories about school days, because we do have I think some teachers present, and I think one of motivation is the whole thing of school children learning about the past and being able to identify as a child with those experiences. So I think one of the things that comes to mind of my school days is arithmetic. And, you know, I'm very bad at arithmetic. And when I was thinking about this, I thought, I wonder if this has something to do with my reluctance to really focus on arithmetic or mathematics. We had very colourful books in our mathematics classes, and we would have a lot of pictures. You know, it was early school days, and so we would be counting apples and cabbages, and there would be these beautiful pictures of fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. And then suddenly one day, the pictures and the books changed. We got new pictures, and they were pictures of guns and helmets. And I can remember that. Why do I remember that? I think it's this portent of indoctrination and the militant indoctrination beginning so early, the first school days. I went to a fairly small school. I mean, Garland was not a big town, and the school that us Jewish children, there were about 8 or 9 Jewish children of school age in Garland at that time. We went to the Evangelische Schule, which is like the Lutheran school, the Protestant school. You know, there was a Catholic school and a Protestant school. And we were part of the Protestant school. And I have this very vivid memory of playtime, recreation, standing in, it was a kind of concrete, it was not very pleasing, but there would be games and it would be nice to be outside. And I can remember standing with the other Jewish children. We were different ages, and we were surrounded by the other children, the non-Jewish children. And we were in a circle, and they sang the most terrible songs. You know, there were songs that were very, very violent and vicious. And they sang these songs, and it was like being stoned. You know, words can be very violent. And of course, words lead to violence. But, you know, that was before Kristallnacht, you know, the real violence. So there are those cautious memories of school. So that was one aspect of life.
And I'm just going to jump ahead just slightly and reading your book, the moment where you talk about saying goodbye to your parents really stands out. And really, when you're reading it, it's that moment of, you know, realization of your journey and what's ahead of you. And I just wondered if you could talk a little about that moment.
Yeah, it was saying goodbye to my parents. I said goodbye to them in the city of Cologne, because we had been moved to Cologne from our smaller town, and my parents had made this decision to send me, but I was an only child, and I was very spoilt. I was kind of the apple of their eye. I was also very strong-willed. And I think that was the reason they couldn't tell me what was actually happening. The event itself, saying goodbye to my parents, was framed in the concept, you're going on a nice trip. You know, this is going to be great. And so I went with them, and it was evening, to the Hauptbahnhof, the main station in Cologne, and there were lots and lots of other children. I mean, there were several hundred that would be leaving, and their parents. And the moment that is the most vivid to me is mounting the steps of the train. And, you know, at that time in Germany, the steps were very steep, and I was small for my age. So they helped me up the steps. And then when I got at the top of the steps, I turned around and I saw they were crying. And suddenly, this idea that this was going to be an adventure vanished, and the trauma began. And the reason I think, you know, asking myself, why do I remember so vividly certain memories? And there's so much that's lost. And I think it was such a significant loss in my life. And I think that was the moment of really learning to deal with hard things by withdrawing into myself and suppressing the feelings. And I can only imagine what my parents felt like, you know, because by that time, I think deep down, most Jews realized that things were pretty bad for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. I mean, we think maybe sometimes that it's on arrival or much later when war's declared that there's this overwhelming sense of separation and loss, but you know, it starts so much earlier, like you've just explained, on departure. And you know, that moment of loss starts in Germany. It doesn't start on arrival in Britain. It's that moment of separation on that train in Germany. Again, I'm just skipping ahead slightly, but carrying on from what you were saying. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your time in Britain.
Yeah, it was in many ways, you know, it was a time where my physical life was saved. It was a place of comparative safety. Although actually I ended up in Coventry, in a small place called Exhall, just outside the city. And I lived in Exhall, Coventry. I was there for the night of the Blitz. So it was a time of learning to survive, really. And, you know, it was also, wow, this is really dark stuff. It was, I had been in this loving Jewish family. You know, this is a generalization, but many times Jews are very emotional, and it all hangs out, and you touch a lot, and you hug, and you express your feelings. You know, your feelings erupt, and they, you know, the good ones and the bad ones, you know. But, you know, at that time in England, you had a stiff upper lip and you sucked it up, you know. So I was trying to navigate, how do you behave? What's the right way to behave? And I was cared for physically, but I really missed that love, you know. And so a lot of time, it was trying to negotiate this, you know. I think also it has to be said that this was a very dangerous time for Britain. You know, any moment when I first arrived and the war was first declared, everyone was waiting for an invasion. And so there was a lot of fear and anxiety. And then there was all the rationing and everything. So I had this mixed emotion about the time, because I was definitely cared for. I was not, I would say I was emotionally deprived, but I was safe with the family where I was. But I'm also aware that the whole country was somewhat in crisis.
And I wondered if you could tell us, your post-war experiences. Reading in your book, you travelled to so many countries and met so many amazing people as well on your journey. And I wondered if you could tell us about your movements after the war, but also touching upon your journey to forgiveness, as the title of your book states.
Yeah, and it says one Jewish survivor's long journey to forgiveness. It was a long journey. But it's interesting that you pose that question that way, Amy, because the whole thing of forgiveness was that middle event from this feeling of how do I cope, gritting my teeth, to releasing me, to being healed. And I would say that being able to travel and to go to different places and explore was this big change in me, because I was so needing security. My first job was in the British Civil Service, and I was such a square peg in a round hole. It was absolutely not me, and I hated it. But the reason I kept doing it was because of the pension. I was 17 years old and I was thinking about a pension. Can you believe that? That was my need for security. And the healing, the forgiveness also released me to become a teacher, to move out of that insecurity. So you see, what led me to this place of healing? I've kind of alluded to it about closing into myself, but I was actually a very, very angry teenager, young person. I was very bitter against Germany and what had happened to me. And actually, you hardly did believe this, I felt that my parents had abandoned me. Can you imagine that? That was kind of real deep down. So I wanted to forgive because I knew somehow my own emotional health depended on that I was on a downward trajectory. And I needed to be delivered from that. And that was the process in which I, as a Jew, came to see that Jesus was my Messiah, and that I could bring my anger and bitterness and actual hatred to him and ask God to forgive me for what had taken place in my life. And that was the pivotal point in my life. It was the beginning of a journey. I would emphasize it's the beginning. It wasn't like I turned a switch and everything was light and beautiful. But I would say that it was like climbing out of a very dark place. And with that freedom, the real me began to emerge. I wasn't this person who was closed in and fearful. I was actually a very adventurous person who with a sense that God was my father and with me, I had this freedom to go out into the world. So I actually went to Italy, and then I traveled to India and beyond. And I married my husband in Belgium, and I met my husband in Belgium and we married in India. And we lived on an international ship for years, visiting. And so you see, some of the people on this call are from our past, from these different countries. And I'm just amazed that it's like this huge change has taken place, you know.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful that so many of your friends have written to me over the last couple of days, and you know, really wanting to connect to you on this on via Zoom. I'll break here just to say that Hannah and myself met on Instagram, so social media is fantastic. Yeah, Bill's going to speak shortly about memorials, but I just wondered what it was like for you to, you know, go back to Germany. You've been back several times now, and we've spoken about all the friends and all the activities that you've done there. I just wondered if you could share a few stories of going back to Germany.
Yeah, you know, the whole thing of returning to Germany has been more recent. So I would say that the whole healing journey is progressive. You know, it's not like it's all done at the beginning. And I feel that a very important part for me in healing was to actually go back to the places of pain. So George and I went back to visit Gmund, and we actually went to that schoolyard, which is now a parking lot, but the school is no more. But I stood in the parking lot and I asked God to lift that memory, and I asked God to be with the descendants of those children who'd stood in that circle. So that was very freeing. And we met people in the most beautiful way. We stayed in the home of this lady whose husband had died, but he had actually known my father and had spoken about him. So she wanted us to stay with her. And one day she said to us, Hannah, did you know that you had a live-in maid when you were a child? And I said, no. And she said, well, you know, she's still alive and she would like to meet you. Would you like to meet her? Of course I would. And, you know, in Germany we have Kaffee and Kuchen. And so she invited her to Kaffee and Kuchen. And she actually lived in a very beautiful home. And it was like this garden house. And her garden was like a park. It was very lovely. And so the doorbell rings. And this lady stands there. And I can hardly see her. She's got this big bunch of flowers, you know. Because you're supposed to bring flowers when you go to invited to Kaffee and Kuchen. And it was Lisbeth. And this is the beautiful thing. Lisbeth had actually mourned the loss of my mother. There was a special relationship between them. And the fact of seeing me was somehow a healing to her pain. But what she gave me, you couldn't measure. It was immeasurable. She actually could tell me stories about my mother. And you see, this was the pain at that time when I was writing the book, the lack of really seeing my parents as rounded people, their personalities, their character. So she could tell me these little stories, which she did, I mean, nonstop. And it was as though I made this connection with my mother through her. And Elizabeth's dead now, but that was a very deep relationship that I treasure.
Absolutely. She's mentioned in your book as well, so for people that want to find out more about that story, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I'm going to end with one last question and invite other speakers, and we may pick up on a few questions that I've not been able to ask you, but the one I'm going to end with, actually I'm going to ask you two. The one before I end with is I'd like to ask you a question about your identity, and could you tell us how you identify yourself?
Okay. I think, having heard me this far, you will realize that I have a very complex relationship with identity. You know, I mean, I've been a Jewish child in a home that practiced kosher and the festivals. And then I was plucked out of that into England and then traveled the world. And now I'm married to an American and I'm living in America. I mean, it's kind of a really varied, multicolored background. But it's very hard to fit me in theologically, because you see, I am Jewish. I'm totally Jewish. I mean, how can I not be? But I'm totally a follower of Jesus. So I don't always fit nicely, you know. But at this age of 88, I feel kind of comfortable in not needing to have the perfect category, you know. So I would say that I'm a German, Jewish, English Christian.
Amazing. It's so wonderful to hear about all your travels, and we've had several discussions about identity, so it's absolutely fascinating to you know, really unpick your story. I suppose my final question is, could you share with us what happened to your parents?
Yes. You know, I didn't know what happened to my parents until well into my return visits to Germany. And I had received information from the Red Cross, which actually turned out to be inaccurate. But I visited a place in Cologne called the LD House. This building had been the headquarters of the Gestapo in the war, but now it is dedicated to the history of the Jews of Cologne. And it is like a museum. And on one or two of the floors, there are historians whose focus is bringing to light what actually happened in the National Socialist time in Cologne. They also have special exhibitions and permanent exhibitions. And in the bottom of in the basement of the building are still the cells where prisoners were interrogated. So it's a very significant place in the history of Cologne. We visited there, and one of the historians, named Barbara Becker-Jagli, a very gracious woman, gave me the definitive answer to what happened to my parents. My parents were deported from Cologne to the ghetto of Lodz they lived in the Lotz ghetto for about 8 months. And then they were taken to a nearby village called Chumno, where it was totally an extermination place. It was not a kind of workplace for slave labor. It was totally focused on extermination. And it was one of the first places where gassing was practiced in trucks. And my parents were gassed in a truck with 60 or 70 other fellow Jews. And then they were gassed as the truck was driving from the village of Chumno to the forest. And then they were burnt in the forest. And she told me this, and then she was so sorrowful, and she showed me pictures of the Lotz ghetto. And I knew none of this. I'd never heard of Chumno. And it was a total shock. But it was as though in the moment that she spoke to me, and you know, you've no idea how compassionate she was. It wasn't like some historian official who was giving you the facts. She was, she felt with me. And you know, I have to say that one of the things in my healing is to experience the compassion of Germans and to experience their own pain with their history. And you know, one of my greatest, one of the things I value so much is if I can be with a German together and impart something of mercy to them. And so I just feel God's mercy to me in letting me hear that news in an environment of graciousness, you know, not hardness. Well, anyway, in that moment that she was sharing and showing me these pictures, a thought came to me: I must go to that place. I must go to that place. And in the book, I share about this amazing experience of going there with 9 friends. And you know, Verena is on the call right now from Austria. And Verena was one of the friends who accompanied me to Chumno and to the forest. And you know, Chumno, Verena had a very profound reason for going, because of her own, the Nazism in her family. And you know, going to Chumno together was an experience of healing for her and also for me, you know.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing your experiences with us. Just before we end this part of the talk, Hannah sent me a photo yesterday, which I'm going to share with you all now. Of was it your first day in England? Did you say?
Yeah, the first day, yeah.
And there you are.